My name is Rebecca, and this is the story of how my uncle thought he could steal my childhood home from under my nose, only to lose everything he owned in the process. Let me start from the beginning. My grandmother, Nana Rose, was the anchor of our family. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8 years old. Her little Victorian house on Maple Street wasn't just a home, it was my sanctuary. Every creaky floorboard, every afternoon sunbeam through the kitchen window, every rose in her backyard garden held memories that shaped who I became. When Nana Rose passed away 2 years ago at 93, she left that house to me in her will. She had always told me it would be mine someday, that all those summers the first spent helping her tend the garden, and all those winters I spent reading to her by the fireplace meant something. The house represented continuity, family legacy, and the promise that I'd always have a place to call home. My Uncle Martin, Nana's youngest son, had always been the black sheep of the family. While Nana raised me with love and stability, Martin bounced from job to job, scheme to scheme, always looking for easy money and never quite finding it. He lived across the country in Nevada, and honestly, I rarely thought about him except during holiday phone calls that usually ended with him asking for money. After the funeral, I had planned to move into Nana's house eventually. At the time, I was finishing my master's degree in social work and living in a cramped apartment across town. The house needed some updates, and I wanted to take my time making it feel like mine while still honoring Nana's memory. So I decided to rent it out temporarily to a lovely elderly couple, the Johnsons, who promised to take care of it like their own. Everything was going smoothly until that phone call changed everything. I was at work helping families navigate the adoption process when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was frantic, confused, and belonged to Mrs. Johnson. She told me that strangers had shown up at the house that morning with paperwork claiming they were the new owners. They said the house had been sold and that the Johnsons needed to vacate immediately. Mrs. Johnson was crying, telling me that these people were demanding they leave by the weekend. My blood turned ice cold. I told Mrs. Johnson I'd call her right back and immediately dialed my family lawyer, Mr. Patterson, who had handled Nana's estate. What he told me made my stomach drop to the floor. According to the county records, the house had been sold 3 weeks earlier for significantly below market value to a real estate investment company. The seller listed on all the paperwork was Martin Wells, my uncle. Somehow, my uncle had managed to forge documents and sell my house without my knowledge or consent. Mr. Patterson explained that this kind of fraud was becoming more common, especially when family members had access to personal documents and knowledge of property details. But knowing that didn't make the betrayal sting any less. I felt sick, angry, and completely violated. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about my childhood, my memories, and the last connection I had to the grandmother who raised me. Martin had literally stolen my past and sold it to strangers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times Nana had talked about keeping the family together, about how important it was to take care of each other. She had always defended Martin, always believed he'd eventually find his way. And this was how he repaid her memory, by stealing from the granddaughters she'd loved and raised. But as I lay there in the dark, something else came to mind. Something I'd almost forgotten about. 2 years earlier, when Nana's health was declining, she had asked me to become her power of attorney. She was worried about making medical decisions and managing her finances as her mind started to slip. I had taken care of everything for her final 18 months, making sure her bills were paid, her medications were managed, and her affairs were in order. What I suddenly remembered was that Nana had also given me power of attorney over Martin. It sounds strange, but let me explain. Martin had gotten himself into serious legal and financial trouble about 5 years ago, something involving unpaid taxes and a failed business venture. He was facing potential jail time and had lost his house. Nana, ever the protective mother, had bailed him out financially and helped him get back on his feet. As part of that arrangement, and because Martin had proven he couldn't manage money responsibly, Nana had insisted that he sign power of attorney documents giving her control over his major financial decisions. When she became my ward, those powers transferred to me. I had completely forgotten about this arrangement because Martin had been living quietly in Nevada, and I assumed he was staying out of trouble. But now, sitting in my apartment at 2 in the morning, I realized I might have legal recourse that went far beyond just trying to prove fraud. The next morning, I called Mr. Patterson again and asked him to review all the documents from Nana's estate, specifically looking for any power of attorney agreements involving Martin. What he found was even better than I had hoped. Not only did I have power of attorney over Martin's finances, but the agreement specifically stated that any real estate transactions, business deals, or major financial decisions had to be approved by the power of attorney holder, which was now me. Martin selling my house without my approval wasn't just fraud. It was a direct violation of our existing legal agreement. But Mr. Patterson discovered something even more interesting. In the 2 years since Nana's death, Martin had apparently been quite busy. He had started a small construction business in Nevada using the money Nana had left him. He owned 3 rental properties, 2 vehicles, and had several business accounts with substantial balances. All of these assets were acquired and managed under the power of attorney agreement, which meant they were all technically subject to my oversight and approval. Martin had essentially built a small empire while legally required to get my permission for major financial decisions, permission he had never sought and that I had never given. Mr. Patterson explained that we could potentially freeze all of Martin's assets pending an investigation into the fraudulent sale of my house. If we could prove that Martin had been systematically violating the power of attorney agreement, we might be able to recover not just the house, but compensation for damages from his other assets. I told Mr. Patterson to proceed with everything. I wanted Martin to face the full consequences of his betrayal. The legal process moved surprisingly quickly. Within a week, we had filed injunctions freezing all of Martin's known assets. His bank accounts were frozen, his properties were placed under legal hold, and his business operations were suspended pending investigation. The real estate company that bought my house was surprisingly cooperative once they realized they had purchased stolen property. They agreed to reverse the sale rather than face potential criminal charges for receiving stolen goods. But the timing of what happened next was what made this story truly satisfying. 2 weeks after we froze his assets, I discovered that Martin had scheduled a major auction for the following Saturday. He was apparently planning to sell off equipment from his construction business and was hoping to raise enough money to expand his operations. He had no idea that everything he thought he owned was now under legal control. I decided to attend the auction. I wanted to see his face when he realized his entire world was crashing down, just like mine had crashed down when I got that phone call from Mrs. Johnson. I drove 8 hours to Nevada and arrived at the auction site on Saturday morning. It was being held in a large warehouse on the outskirts of Reno, and Martin had clearly put a lot of effort into organizing it. There were dozens of pieces of construction equipment, tools, vehicle, and even some furniture from his rental properties. Martin was walking around in his best suit, greeting potential buyers and acting like the successful businessman he thought he was. He looked confident, proud, and completely unaware that his entire life was about to implode. I waited until the auction was about to begin. Martin stepped up to the microphone to welcome everyone and start the proceedings. That's when I walked up to the front of the crowd. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me. Confusion, then recognition, then growing panic as he realized I shouldn't be there. I handed him the legal papers that Mr. Patterson had prepared. The documents explaining that all of his assets were frozen, that the auction was immediately canceled, and that he was under investigation for fraud and violation of power of attorney agreements. Martin's face went through several shades of pale as he read the documents. The crowd of potential buyers started murmuring, confused about what was happening. Some people began leaving when they realized there would be no auction. But I wasn't done. I took the microphone and addressed the crowd. I explained that Martin had fraudulently sold my childhood home, my inheritance from my grandmother who had raised me, and that he had been conducting business for years without the legally required approvals. I told them that anyone who had done business with Martin in the past 2 years should contact Mr. Patterson's office to ensure their transactions were legitimate and protected. The humiliation on Martin's face was complete. Not only had his auction been canceled and his assets seized, but his reputation in his business community was now destroyed. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next month, the investigation revealed that Martin's violations were even more extensive than we had initially thought. He had been forging documents, misrepresenting his financial authority, and conducting business under false pretenses for nearly 2 years. The rental properties he owned had been purchased using credit applications that claimed he had full financial autonomy, a lie that violated his power of attorney restrictions. The construction business had been operating without proper oversight, and several of his contracts had been signed without the required approvals. The legal aftermath was more complex and satisfying than I could have ever imagined. Mr. Patterson explained that power of attorney cases involving fraud were particularly serious because they represented a fundamental violation of trust and legal responsibility. What made Martin's situation even worse was that he had been actively hiding his business activities from me. During the investigation, we discovered email chains and text messages where he had specifically instructed business partners and contractors not to contact me or mention our family relationship. He had been deliberately concealing his operations to avoid triggering the oversight requirements of the power of attorney agreement. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a conversation Martin had with a business partner about buying my house. In recorded phone calls that were subpoenaed during the investigation, Martin was heard saying that he needed to move quickly to sell the property before I found out about his plans. He actually told someone that I was too busy with my graduate studies to pay attention to property records, and that by the time I discovered the sale, it would be too late to stop it. Hearing those recordings was devastating but also infuriating. Martin hadn't just stumbled into fraud. He had carefully planned to steal my inheritance and had counted on my trust and distraction to get away with it. The investigation also revealed that Martin had been researching ways to break or circumvent power of attorney agreements for months before he sold my house. He had consulted with multiple lawyers about his legal obligations and had been specifically told that he needed my approval for major transactions. He chose to ignore that legal advice and proceed with his plans anyway. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came when investigators examined Martin's financial records more closely. They found that he had been systematically violating the power of attorney agreement almost from the moment it went into effect. When Nana passed away and the power of attorney transferred to me, Martin was supposed to notify me of his financial situation and get approval for any major decisions. Instead, he had been making significant purchases, signing business contracts, and even taking out loans without any oversight or approval. The 3 rental properties I mentioned earlier, Martin had purchased all of them using fraudulent loan applications where he claimed to have full financial autonomy. He had forged documents suggesting that the power of attorney agreement had been dissolved after Nana's death, when in reality it had transferred to me. His construction business had been operating under false pretenses as well. Martin had signed contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, all while legally required to get my approval for any business deal over $10,000. He had essentially been running an unauthorized business empire while pretending to have legal authority he didn't possess. The scope of his deception was staggering. We're talking about 2 full years of systematic fraud, forgery, and violation of legal agreements. Martin hadn't just made one bad decision. He had built his entire post-Nana life on a foundation of lies and illegal activity. When news of the investigation became public in Martin's business community, the fallout was swift and severe. His construction company had been working on several major projects, including a hotel renovation and 2 residential developments. All of those contracts were immediately suspended when the general contractors learned that Martin had no legal authority to sign them. The hotel project was particularly costly for Martin. He had already received significant advance payments for work that couldn't be completed due to his legal troubles. The hotel owners demanded full refunds and threatened their own legal action for breach of contract and fraud. But the rental property situation was what really sealed Martin's fate financially. When we examined the rental properties more closely, we discovered that Martin had been collecting rent and managing the properties for nearly 18 months. Under the power of attorney agreement, all of that rental income should have been reported to me and managed according to the legal requirements. Instead, Martin had been treating the rental income as his personal money. He had been using it to fund his construction business, make personal purchases, and even take vacations. The total amount of unreported and misappropriated rental income exceeded $60,000. The tenants in Martin's rental properties were also victims of his fraud. When his assets were frozen, they suddenly found themselves living in properties with unclear legal status. Some had been paying rent for apartments that Martin didn't legally have the right to rent out. Mr. Patterson had to work with local housing authorities to ensure that Martin's tenants weren't suddenly left homeless because of his illegal activities. It was a complex legal situation that required careful coordination between multiple agencies and courts. Meanwhile, the investigation into the sale of my house revealed even more disturbing details about Martin's methods and motivations. The real estate investment company that bought my house told investigators that Martin had approached them directly, claiming to be selling the property due to family financial difficulties. He had told them that I was struggling with student loans and couldn't afford to maintain the property, and that the family had agreed to sell it quickly to avoid foreclosure. None of that was true, of course. I had no student debt problems, the property wasn't in any financial distress, and no family meeting or decision had ever taken place. Martin had created an entirely fictional narrative to justify the sale and make it seem legitimate to the buyers. He had also forged several documents to support his story. He had created fake financial statements showing property tax delinquencies that didn't exist. He had forged correspondence for me supposedly agreeing to the sale. He had even created a fake letter from a mortgage company threatening foreclosure. The level of premeditation and deception was far beyond anything I could have imagined. This wasn't a desperate person making a single bad decision. This was a calculated criminal enterprise designed to steal my inheritance and cover up years of unauthorized business activity. The real estate company, once they understood the full scope of Martin's fraud, became valuable allies in the investigation. They provided investigators with all of their communications with Martin, including phone recordings and email chains that revealed additional instances of misrepresentation and forgery. They also shared information about other properties Martin had inquired about selling. Apparently, he had been shopping around several pieces of property, claiming family connections and financial authority he didn't have. My house wasn't his only target. It was just the one where he successfully completed the fraud. As the investigation continued, other victims of Martin's business practices began coming forward. Contractors who had worked with his construction company reported suspicious financial practices and incomplete payments. Suppliers mentioned unusual payment arrangements and irregular business documentation. A complete picture began emerging of someone who had been operating outside the law for years, using his charm and family connections to build trust while systematically deceiving everyone around him. The auction confrontation, which had felt like such a dramatic climax at the time, was actually just the beginning of Martin's legal troubles. In the days following that event, Martin tried to contact me several times. He left voicemails that were alternately pleading and angry, sometimes asking for forgiveness, and sometimes demanding that I drop the legal proceedings. In one particularly revealing message, Martin actually claimed that he deserved Nana's property more than I did because he was her biological son while I was just a granddaughter. He seemed to believe that blood relationship trumped legal inheritance, and that my status as Nana's chosen heir was somehow less legitimate than his family connection. That voicemail, more than anything else, showed me that Martin still didn't understand what he had done wrong. He wasn't sorry for betraying my trust or violating legal agreements. He was sorry for getting caught. Mr. Patterson advised me to stop accepting Martin's calls and to forward all communications through legal channels. Any direct contact between us could potentially complicate the legal proceedings and might give Martin opportunities to intimidate or manipulate me. The criminal case against Martin proceeded parallel to our civil lawsuit. The district attorney's office was particularly interested in prosecuting because power of attorney fraud was becoming a significant problem in their jurisdiction, and they wanted to send a strong message about the consequences of this type of crime. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Diana Reeves, explained that Martin's case was unusual because most power of attorney fraud involved elderly victims who were vulnerable due to age or illness. In our situation, the victim was a capable adult who had been deceived through document forgery and systematic lying. Prosecutor Reeves said that Martin's case could serve as an important precedent for protecting people who hold power of attorney responsibilities and ensuring that those legal arrangements aren't abused by the very people they're supposed to help. The criminal proceedings also revealed additional evidence that we hadn't discovered during our initial investigation. Martin had apparently been researching identity theft and document forgery techniques online. His computer history showed searches for information about forging signatures, creating fake financial documents, and avoiding detection when conducting unauthorized business. He had even researched the specific procedures for selling inherited property and had studied common oversights in estate management that might allow him to complete fraudulent transactions without immediate detection. This evidence of premeditation made Martin's crimes much more serious under state law. What might have been treated as a family dispute or simple fraud became a case of deliberate criminal conspiracy with extensive planning and research. But the most satisfying development in the criminal case was the discovery of Martin's financial records from before Nana's death. It turned out that Martin had been borrowing money from Nana for years, always promising to pay her back, but never actually doing so. The investigation revealed that he owed her more than $40,000 at the time of her death, money that he had borrowed for various failed business ventures and personal expenses. Nana had never mentioned this debt to me, probably because she didn't want to burden me with family financial problems while I was focusing on my studies. But the legal obligation still existed, and it meant that Martin actually owed money to Nana's estate rather than being entitled to inherit anything from it. Under state inheritance law, debts to the deceased must be resolved before any distribution of assets can take place. This meant that Martin should have been paying money back to Nana's estate instead of receiving inheritance or having any claim to family property. The discovery of this debt completely undermined any argument Martin might have made about deserving a share of Nana's property. Not only was he not entitled to inherit anything, but he actually owed substantial money to the estate that should have been paid before I received my inheritance. This financial discovery also created additional criminal charges related to inheritance fraud and illegal appropriation of estate assets. By the time all the charges were filed, Martin was facing more than a dozen different criminal counts and civil liability that exceeded $200,000. The civil settlement negotiations were almost as satisfying as the criminal prosecution. Martin's lawyer initially tried to argue that his client had been confused about his legal obligations and hadn't intended to commit fraud. Mr. Patterson quickly demolished that defense by presenting the evidence of Martin's research, planning, and deliberate deception. The computer searches, the forged documents, and the recorded conversations all proved that Martin had known exactly what he was doing and had chosen to proceed despite understanding the legal consequences. Martin's lawyer then tried to negotiate a settlement that would allow Martin to keep some of his assets in exchange for admitting wrongdoing and paying damages. Mr. Patterson rejected those proposals immediately. We weren't interested in allowing Martin to profit from his crimes, and we wanted to ensure that he faced full consequences for his actions. The goal wasn't just to recover my property, but to make sure that Martin couldn't continue operating businesses or managing property while demonstrated such a fundamental disregard for legal obligations and family trust. The final settlement required Martin to surrender all assets acquired during the time he was violating the power of attorney agreement. This included not just the obvious things like rental properties and business equipment, but also personal items, vehicles, and even household goods that had been purchased with income from his illegal business activities. Martin was essentially returned to the financial position he had been in when Nana died, minus the additional debts and legal costs he had accumulated through his criminal behavior. The criminal case concluded with Martin pleading guilty to multiple felony charges in exchange for a reduced prison sentence. He received 18 months in state prison, 5 years of probation, and a requirement to pay full restitution for all damages and legal costs. The judge in the case specifically noted that Martin's crimes represented a serious violation of family trust and legal responsibility, and that the sentence needed to reflect the deliberate and systematic nature of his fraud. During the sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement. Standing in that courtroom, looking at Martin in his orange jumpsuit, I felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction that I hadn't expected. I told the judge about what Nana's house meant to me, about the memories and security that Martin had tried to steal. I explained how his betrayal had affected not just my financial situation, but my ability to trust family and feel secure in my own inheritance. But I also talked about the importance of legal consequences for people who abuse positions of trust. Martin's crimes weren't just about money or property. They were about fundamental respect for law, family, and the responsibilities that come with legal authority over other people's lives and assets. Martin never apologized during the sentencing hearing. Even facing prison time, he maintained that his actions had been justified and that the legal system was treating him unfairly. That lack of remorse, more than anything else, convinced me that we had made the right decision to pursue full legal consequences rather than trying to work out some kind of family reconciliation. The house restoration became a therapeutic process that helped me move beyond the trauma and betrayal of Martin's actions. Every repair, every improvement, and every careful restoration of Nana's original features felt like an act of healing and reclamation. I kept detailed photo albums documenting the restoration process, partly for my own satisfaction and partly to honor Nana's memory by showing how her beloved home had been preserved and renewed despite Martin's attempts to destroy that legacy. The kitchen renovation was particularly meaningful. Nana had always talked about updating her old appliances and countertops, but she had never gotten around to making those changes. I used modern materials but kept the same layout and color scheme she had loved, creating a space that felt both familiar and fresh. The garden restoration was equally important. Martin's brief ownership and the subsequent legal battles had resulted in nearly a year of neglect, and many of Nana's carefully cultivated plants had been damaged or destroyed. I worked with a local master gardener to identify and replace the original varieties Nana had planted, using old photographs and her garden journals to recreate the landscaping as closely as possible. Every rose bush, every herb plant, and every flowering border was chosen to honor her original vision while ensuring the garden would thrive for years to come. The financial compensation from the legal settlement allowed me to make improvements that Nana never could have afforded. I updated the electrical system, replaced the old plumbing, and added modern insulation while preserving all the original architectural details that gave the house its character. But perhaps the most meaningful addition was a small plaque I installed near the front door. It reads, Rose Wells Memorial Home, established 1952, restored 2024, a legacy of love, strength, and justice. That plaque serves as a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and that family legacy isn't just about property or money. It's about values, memories, and the courage to stand up for what's right even when the fight is difficult and painful. The entire experience taught me lessons about trust, family, and legal protection that I never expected to learn. It also gave me a deeper appreciation for the legal system and the importance of documentation, proper procedures, and professional guidance when dealing with complex family and financial situations. Today, 3 years after that initial phone call from Mrs. Johnson, I live peacefully in Nana's restored house. The Johnsons have become like family, often joining me for Sunday dinners and helping maintain the garden that means so much to all of us. Martin completed his prison sentence and moved to another state. I don't know what he's doing now, and I don't particularly care. The important thing is that justice was served, my inheritance was protected, and Nana's legacy was preserved for future generations. The power of attorney documents that seemed like boring paperwork turned out to be the key to everything. They gave me the legal authority to stop Martin's criminal behavior and recover what he had stolen, but more importantly, they reflected Nana's wisdom and foresight in protecting her family even after her death. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about the consequences Martin faced, or if I ever considered just letting the whole situation go to avoid family conflict. The answer is simple. Betraying someone's trust and stealing their inheritance are serious crimes that deserve serious consequences, regardless of family relationships. Martin made his choices, knowing the potential legal and personal costs. I simply ensured that those consequences were enforced according to the law and the legal agreements he had willingly signed. The house on Maple Street continues to be a source of joy, stability, and connection to family history. But now it's also a symbol of resilience, justice, and the importance of standing up for yourself when faced with betrayal and fraud. Nana's roses bloom every summer, her kitchen still fills with afternoon sunshine, and her memory lives on in every corner of the home she loved and protected. And thanks to the legal battle that preserved her legacy, future generations will be able to experience that same sense of belonging and continuity that she worked so hard to create. Sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to fight for what they believed in and ensure that their values and priorities are respected long after they're gone. In protecting this house and pursuing justice against Martin, I like to think I was carrying on Nana's tradition of standing up for family, fairness, and doing what's right no matter how difficult the circumstances. The sweet taste of justice served with legal precision turned out to be far more satisfying than any revenge I could have imagined. And the power of attorney that seemed like simple paperwork became the instrument of both protection and justice that Nana had wisely put in place to safeguard the family she loved.